I'm your host, Sarah Sorniak. I'm helping prepare you for your next journey and empower you to take it on. Whether you're searching for a job or facing a roadblock which led you to a detour in life, we're sharing stories that will help you put your best foot forward. Hey there, Sarah Sorniak with Best Foot Forward. Today's episode, we've got a good one for you. It's about how to be your own PR machine on the job hunt. And with me today, I have Jon Tashjian, who is the Communications Director at 19 Ideas, a strategic marketing agency based in Buffalo, New York. Jon is an experienced communications leader and advisor whose passion is to connect people, ideas that can tell impactful stories. A native of Boston, Mass., Jon has spent his career helping organizations to establish communication strategies that help take their businesses to the next level. Today, he is a proud Buffalonian dad and husband who, like so many others here, is committed to his community. I really appreciate Jon taking the time. I think there is a lot of really valuable information to be your own PR machine. There's a lot. You really need to kind of toot your own horn, and that can be kind of hard for somebody if you're very humble and even an introvert, but it's a great opportunity to advance yourself and, be proud of the accomplishments that you've done. And also we tackle some issues that could be, if you have your own little PR crisis, whether you've had something happen in your life, how to address that in interviews. And, if you have gaps in employment, if you have, a relative quick turnaround with work histories, if you, say you have every 2 years you switch a job, how do you approach that from a PR perspective to be appealing for employers? I hope you enjoy it. I have Jon with me from 19 Ideas, who's the communications director. And today we're going to be talking about how to be your own PR machine in the job hunt. But, first, Jon, welcome to the show. Really appreciate you coming on to do this.
Thanks for having me. No, it's great to be back and really appreciate the time.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about, what's going on with 19 Ideas right now. I know there's so much hemming and humming and buzzing going on at 19 Ideas. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what's up?
Sure. So no, I mean it's a great time to be at 19 Ideas. It's a great time to be in marketing, I'd say. I think, communication has never been probably more important as much as you think about environmental things that are happening last couple of years, ways organizations are trying to figure out how marketing fits in ways that they can, not only market to their consumers, but also, more than ever to their employees, and make sure people feel part of the changing landscape that is business, right? So for us, it's been great. We've adopted a hybrid model, as a lot of companies have. So we have 2 days where our employees, Mondays and Fridays, can work remotely, and 3 days we're in the office, which really sort of fosters that collaboration. And as far as our business goes, from giving back in the community side of things, we are also exploring and are very much involved in a couple of partnerships we're excited about. One with Say Yes Buffalo, where we've just launched the Marketing Communications Fellowship, which is a year-round 12-month program that our first fellows started in September, where we are ultimately looking to lead by example in opening doors for inclusion, diversity, and really giving this fellow a chance to work side by side in an agency environment around the year. He's actually a undergraduate, and that's where this program is geared towards. And it's really designed to not only give a 12-month experience as part of an agency environment, but also to long-term sort of foster a network and community of people who have kind of gone through our alumni program, so to speak, and can make connections in the community and advance their passions, whether it be in marketing, communications, or things that are tangential to that. And the other partnership, just briefly, comes to mind is with Persistence Prep. Katie Krosick, our CEO, is actually very involved with them as a former board member. And we've had programs with them throughout the year where we work with third graders who are really, really young in their careers, but who find connections in marketing in their own ways. They're so excited. They come in and they're so jazzed up to be part of just, being that. I don't think you can ever be, it's never too early to start, being a storyteller.
Oh,
being a
absolutely.
marketer,
You
you know?
notice that because in third grade, you're seeing so much. I mean, a lot of kids, especially children in this generation, they're really into technology.
Yeah.
So that they're in the realm of really in their reading careers as well. So do you see a lot of, potential little marketers in
Oh,
that group?
yeah, and I hear so much from a number of folks in our staff have been working so closely with them too, and just the stories that come out of it, you just see the excitement in them, and that alone is just is worth. It's why we do it. It's why we do what we do. That same kind of palpable excitement is why we do what we do with our clients too. It's just we live off that stuff, and so I think to see it in children that young, and like you said, content's so big now, and the ways you share, the ways you post, the ways you just tell it, it's validating for sure. So
You might
absolutely.
wanna be planting some seeds for what they might want to do when they grow up
Ex-
early.
exactly. I think that's the whole idea, right? So it's hard to tell a third grader exactly where your path will go, but they remember things like that, and they present at the end of the year. They actually do things on their own, so it's wonderful.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
really so. In the past few months, you guys have grown quite a bit at 19 Ideas. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So we've made some really good strides in hiring. I'd say across the board we're evaluating positions and making sure that we have not only have people who check the boxes from a professional side, but also culturally and just as general practitioners and people. Those are all real important to us. And so recently in the last few months we made a couple of really exciting hires and brought people on board, one of whom is his name is Steve Rains. He's a seasoned business executive, has launched successfully a couple of companies on his own, and has now come in to be our development director, where he's making a big impact on that side, as well as, frankly, having a good say in operations and how we are thinking about procedurally how we work together as a unit. And we've also hired longtime agency executive Bob Henry, who has really spent the majority of his career in the agency side of things, and he's our digital experience director. So from the side of Bob's perspective and Steve's, that complements mine is communications, and our creative director Amber Ampino. We have what we've intentionally built is a really strong sort of director level team that is highly collaborative. When I say director, we as a 25 or so person company, you can't have a stagnant sort of hierarchical system that you would normally envision for a company that maybe needs one as a much larger level. But for us, we're excited where the company's leadership is taking it. The buy-in from our partners, Katie and Dan, has been terrific, and we just are excited for the future. So yeah, it's been a great few months, and we're excited to see where things go.
That's really, really exciting too. And I've been following you guys and seeing what you've done with like the space too,
Mm-hmm.
creating unique spaces, which I'm planning on talking with Katie about
Awesome.
that, and workplace environments and all that. I mean, it's just been really fun to watch what's going on with 19 Ideas.
Thanks. I mean, she'll probably tell you that I think the last time you and I spoke, that space was about ready to be used, and then we obviously couldn't use it for a long time.
I know
So
that must have been a bit of
it,
a gut
it
punch
was
at
interesting.
first.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Yeah.
it looks beautiful, and especially for the creatives, what a great opportunity to have different unique spaces. And I'm sure she'll go into it with me, but from what I gather, it's a lot of thought went into that, and that's really amazing.
Absolutely.
So, I figured, especially as a communications pro, and you've worked with PR, I figured you'd be a great person to ask. I know it's a bit of a shift with trying to be your own PR machine, but essentially, like when you're on a job hunt, you kind of
Mhm.
have to put your best foot forward. So with social platforms like LinkedIn, which are important for standing out on the job hunt, what should job seekers try to do from a PR perspective to stand out in the hunt?
Yeah, I think, and it's an interesting point because I think as much as we're focused, and rightly so, attention has been focused a lot into how digital and public relations are very interconnected. The fundamentals, I would say, in terms of how you stand out, largely remain the same. When you take a platform like LinkedIn, you need to be as authentic as possible. So whatever reads from what you're posting, LinkedIn needs to still sound like you in a way that is not like it was drafted by anybody and just posted because it looks good. I think it's so tempting to post things that just kind of read very much like PR speak, and I think that's good to an extent, but it won't necessarily separate you from anything because, like I said, a lot of people are posting that sort of thing. So um one way to really think about if you're being from a public relations seat and treating LinkedIn as sort of a platform for promotion would be to not only just post things that explain, but also engage in content. Ask questions of other people out there, whether it's people you're connected with, or maybe tagging certain groups or certain people to respond in a way where you're openly showing you are sort of a convener of communication that way, because I think that also can speak to the kind of professional you are and your curiosity in the field. So I would also say that your profile is a really important piece on LinkedIn. So that fundamentally speaking, if you're going out and looking for a job outside of social, you want your resume to be buttoned up first. LinkedIn is very much an extension of a resume. So, thinking about ways to describe yourself and specifically what you do. We're in a very SEO and algorithm driven world. So thinking about the right terms that describe what you do or what you're even interested in doing. If you're young in your career and haven't done a lot yet, there are still ways to articulate and communicate what you do, and then the same way you build a resume. So, brevity, conciseness, but also just being authentic, I think are really key tenets for that.
Well, definitely. I like your point about interacting too, like commenting. And I think a lot of people think that, or they get stuck in just posts on like their main profile and, don't realize that, those opportunities to comment on other things is a great opportunity to network as well and kind of show your expertise.
Totally. Like following people, I think is a really big thing too. Making those connections. We've said we actually had speaking of the Say Yes Fellowship, we had a seminar with a number of folks connected to us through Say Yes about LinkedIn in this very topic. And one of the things that I advocate for, and I think it's shared broadly, is that unlike Facebook and other elements, where you certainly can, need to be aware of it. We might get into that, but for LinkedIn especially, I'm a big advocate of connecting with just about everyone because, and that doesn't mean like spamming and necessarily reaching out to connect with everyone, but if I get invitations to connect, 95% of the time I'll accept it because you don't really, even if you don't know the person, it's very easy to segment those who just are kind of maybe bots versus those who really or highly engaged in that platform. You might know who they are, but you never know where connections can lead, or they might have a connection to somebody. So being brave in that sense and being willing to just find people that interest you, whether it's people specifically in the community or just bigger thinkers, the Richard Bransons of the world, it all matters. It all shows kind of like, what you're interested in, what your passions are, and it can speak in ways that you don't necessarily have to write about, but can be still highly impactful for your profile.
Sure. So what do you think are the top personal PR practices job seekers should follow for professional reasons while on the job hunt?
The top practices, like what should they do?
Yeah, from a PR perspective, like, I kind of think about making sure maybe we're in our like 30s, so life's a little bit different for us these days. But when you're just starting out in the job hunt, say after college, making sure like your Facebook profile, is cleaned up, or Instagram, you're not having like all these crazy party or inappropriate type posts out there that some employers, and they will, tend to do like a search on people to see, because you're essentially, you for an employee, you might not be like the front face of the company, but in essence, you're representing as an employee to some respect. So employers do tend to look at or search for social profiles. So that's kind of where I was aiming. If you think like there are practices people should kind of pay attention to on like the personal side of things, so that things don't come back to haunt them, I guess. When you're on like job hunt.
Completely understood. I think you raise a really good and important point there is, I think that it's all part of your resume these days, right? Your resume itself is a piece of paper, or maybe it's a PDF or whatnot, right? But the actual, your online footprint, your just general interaction is all sort of part of your profile. And so to your point, I think a lot of times if you have two or three candidates, if you're an employer looking to hire someone and are evaluating closely, the differentiators might be things they find that are outside of those things you've provided them, because they're so close. Otherwise, they need to figure out what else can they use as sort of a differentiator. So yes, highly recommend thinking about if you have other social profiles that you are cognizant of what's on them, and but both in the past and also moving forward. It's tough, right? Because transparently, people, depending on the person you are, you may have very strong beliefs. Maybe for a time you were very vocal about those, that you still may not have full regrets about, or whatnot, but the perception of who you are and how it's evaluated is important. So I would say looking at your social profile, any other sort of online activity you've had, whether it be blog posts, that sort of thing, and also just being cognizant of your interactions with people that maybe you're connected with or might not be on LinkedIn, but that you've had in the past. And we're going down a road, I understand, of like more of the controversial side of things. I think equally speaking, you can be and should be cognizant of maybe things you want to be found. So if you have really you're proud of certain things you've done, certain community work you've done, certain things you've written, certain pieces you've submitted for class that you feel are really good, depending on how young you are, thinking about ways you can promote those or highlight those on your LinkedIn profile so that you're equally ready for the positive side. I think those are all important things. I guess on the flip side, what we were talking about earlier, I think it's important to mention too, crisis work is, it's a term in the industry, but it's also just, we call it, you can call it reputation management is a softer way of putting it. But I think one of the best things you can do if there are elements that you're either not so proud of or that you're worried or concerned that they might be things that come up in an interview or an evaluation is to think about ways proactively to yourself that you would respond to those if they came up, or potentially ways that you'd want to proactively bring them up in a discussion before maybe you're asked about it, to show that you really are owning something that you feel should just be put out there for awareness, but ultimately is something you have an appropriate sort of answer and spin for.
So that was definitely a question I was going to ask.
Yeah.
Is, there are some folks out there at some point that, might have their own little personal PR crisis they've got to deal with. So basically, what should a person do in that situation if they're in a bad spot, especially if they're concerned about career goals? So you're saying basically, I mean, I think that's PR 101 too. You're right. Like,
Yeah.
when you're talking about organizations, like you got to own it. And then either the lesson learned share. I mean, how would you recommend like approaching that lesson learned, or
the most basic, I think, way to break down something like that on the constructive side, or the rebuilding side, is there are three kind of tenets you always think about. It's the own it, that's number one. It's the describe or demonstrate what you've done to address it. So usually that's something constructive, right? It's like I did this, or I posted this, or I'm aware that this is a thing. This is what I've done, or these are the steps I've taken or am taking to address it. And then step three is don't do it again. So those are the kinds of three. If you can follow those three steps in any scale, it could be very small, hopefully not much larger than that. But if you can demonstrate those three things, there's no guarantee that, and it's kind of an indefinite timeline for repairing reputation or for addressing things, right? Sometimes it may not result in what you want to happen. It might be something that ultimately, if an employer is evaluating two candidates, separates it in the way that just is, it is what it is and it's out of control. But what you can control is at least what you are doing about it and how you're communicating that. So I always like to advise clients that way too, putting in those three steps. And if you feel like you've sufficiently addressed them, then you've put forward a strategy that is at least sound in its intent.
So on the offensive side,
if
you're an employer, do you think it's reasonable to ask, like, to be upfront if you know about a situation with a person, or if they saw something on social? Because again, like, this could be a person that's representing
Mhm.
company as well.
Yeah, I think it's tricky a little bit because I think certain things that certain things are just difficult to either address because of the nature of what they are. And I know we're going down again a road of something that's a bit more maybe controversial, but I think let's take an example of something that's maybe in the middle, like I see I see you've gone through 3 jobs in the past 8 months or something like that. I think it's entirely appropriate for an employer to evaluate that because that's through the lens of I'm looking to evaluate and see this person at my company, but I also don't want someone who is not really convinced they want to be here for longer than a certain period of time because I'm looking to make a hire for a long term. So, as someone who's looking for a job, I think one of the most important things to think about is not just describing who you are and what you've done, but describing it in a way that you're putting yourself, you're helping the employer envision you there. So I, as a candidate, would want to, or if, let's just say you haven't had any jobs in the past 6 months. I've seen you haven't been employed 6 months. To have a constructive way to describe, there might be a really good reason for it. I know in the past 6 months, I just and be honest too. Past 6 months, I decided I wasn't quite ready for the workforce yet. But what I did do was I traveled to these places, or I worked at restaurant tables because I felt like it was important to in the meantime like study in the evening, think about what I wanted to do, and I'm really and this is why I'm applying here, and pivot to the reason why you're there. So
That's
it at least addresses that elephant in the room, and potentially makes you a strong candidate for showing your honesty. Because I think honesty is one of the most important
yeah.
attributes that an employee or candidate can have.
It goes right back to what you're saying with being as authentic as
Yeah,
no doubt about it.
absolutely.
What behaviors should job seekers steer clear from when building their personal PR machine?
Mm-hmm.
You think?
I think you have to strike a really good balance between being proactive and um, you know, well intentioned and over communicating. I think that's one of the things. I think that a lot of times, it, from a job seeker's perspective, it can be tempting to you just want to get an answer. You want to get a job, so you'll follow up and check in and check in. I think it's important from a if you're acting like a PR practitioner or as your own advocate in that sense, to think about even ahead of time what is learning what you can from the employer, understanding like what their timeline is, so that maybe you can sort of schedule out or think in your minds about when the right times might be to follow up. So you're almost using information you have to inform your strategy. I'm using quotes here. I'm not sure it'll be on video or not, but strategy to reach back out and get responses when you can. Um, I think also it's I think if and from employers' perspective, they like to know that candidates are interested. So it doesn't hurt to follow up, but just doing it at the right cadence and not overburdening those who are sort of the recipients of your messages is good. And I would say that practice applies to any sort of frame of public relations. If you're reaching out to journalists, if you're communicating with any sort of consumer audience base and just developing a strategy for that, if you post too much or if you write too much, it almost has the reverse effect of what you want it to. So there's no one solution, I'd say, or one set cadence, but I think that thinking about your audience and the best ways to reach them in the right cadence is a really good foundational tool.
That's great.
Yeah.
So when it comes to messaging to put out for, if you're a job seeker, this is
Mm-hmm.
kind of a little dicey because I'm sure you've got folks who that they're looking for a job, whether they were laid off at a position, what have you. So I mean they have like that I don't want to say freedom because obviously it's to not have a job is scary, but when you're somebody that is employed, trying to like get feelers out there or messaging out there is a little dicey because you don't always want an employer knowing that you're looking. So what would
Mm-hmm.
you recommend for like messaging in that regard? Would you just recommend trying to be as much of an expert in your field, like if you don't want it to be known that you're looking, and to just kind of make it appear as though you're well versed in your area of expertise, and then kind of let feelers come out as they come out in an organic sense?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think recognizing, as we were talking about earlier, that social media in general, whether it's, LinkedIn, which is probably the most appropriate for this discussion, or otherwise, it's all discoverable if it's out there. So being very intentional about what you do and don't want people to see publicly. But I think fundamentally speaking, like we were saying, social and LinkedIn specifically are very much extensions of your resume, and in a living, breathing way. So that if you continue, my best advice for that would be to continue to think about what content do you want people to see that defines you in that sense, whether it's your curiosity, your industry specific commentary, your perspective on things about, in my perspective, for my own LinkedIn profile, I like to focus on posts that talk a lot about collaboration, leadership, mentorship. So that's kind of a field agnostic trait, but for me, it's highly important, and it does speak to sort of something that I apply to my role as a director and manager of people and sort of general team player. So I think it's thinking about what you want, what attributes or specialties you want to identify and putting that out there. LinkedIn does offer ways for job seekers also to note that they are open to work without it being publicly posted. So there are ways, and obviously you can also proactively reach out to people privately to explore those sorts of opportunities as well. So I think there's ways to balance both at the same time.
So with someone that is openly looking, whether they've, lost a job, I mean, what kind of, how would you recommend they tailor that for their
I think in that case, when the sensitivity is not there, being open about it is certainly not a taboo at all. I think that sometimes employers hiring is such a, especially today, hiring is such a tough process to find good candidates, that if you are unemployed, but you're a highly, capable, resourceful and appropriate person for a role, it doesn't hurt to contextualize that for people too, and saying, I've just posting something that is very open and authentic to your situation, but saying like I'm highly motivated to work and looking to keep the ball rolling. I think that people won't see that. Largely people understand that's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of honesty and confidence in a lot of ways. As long as that's not your only approach, I think you still need to be very active and not just posting about how you're looking for a job, but like any employer, you want to understand like what is it this person can bring to me. So complementing any sort of public message with that, alongside content, perspectives, proactive networking, that can be a well-rounded strategy as long as you're not putting all your eggs in one basket.
Absolutely. Yeah. So when it comes to social too, I mean, we primarily talk about LinkedIn, and obviously that is a huge platform for employment, but do you think job seekers should be active on all platforms when looking, or do you, because connections can happen organically in any capacity, and what are your thoughts on that? And if there's a way that someone can tailor a message to each platform, kind of like how we tailor in the marketing world, we tailor our messaging for different things on topics on different platforms too, if it would be like a similar type thing.
I would say that the short answer is you shouldn't post content for content's sake, no matter who, what you represent, whether you're looking for a job or your own organization or so on. Every platform that's out there now, and TikTok being one of the more newer ones, but the traditional Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, you need to think about what is appropriate for the audience you're trying to reach and the content you're sharing. So LinkedIn, being a professional networking platform, is probably the most relevant for job specific or maybe dialogue that is more tailored to your skill set, and because they even have open fields and things in which you can highlight your community work, your professional career, all those sorts of things. Whereas something like an Instagram, it might be appropriate to, if you like a certain company, you can follow them on Instagram and maybe comment on their posts to show that you're engaged with them and understand them. But you can talk more outwardly about maybe your own attributes on LinkedIn. or if you're in depending on your professional side too, that also might dictate what platforms you try to use. If you're in an industry or a field that is highly visual or creative, you may want to post some things that maybe you've done or connected with on Instagram or Twitter if you feel like that is conducive to the work that you do. Thirdly, I would just say too, in evaluating platforms, you have to think about what you're capable of also doing as a promoter of your own brand. And so by that I mean it's very tempting, I think, to say I'm gonna post on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on all these platforms because it's just gonna broaden my reach and increase chances for me to be seen. That isn't necessarily true. Partly because of the algorithmic nature of a lot of these platforms, Facebook is increasingly hard to be seen without paying for it, first of all. So there is that element of like, you might just be shouting into the void a little bit. And half your potential employers, I'm not sure, looking at Facebook for candidates. They might look at your profile specifically once you're talking with them, but they're not looking to necessarily find people there. And so what I meant by like what you're capable of doing is be realistic with what you're able or what your time allows you to do for posting content, not only with frequency, but with substance. So not putting stuff out there just because you haven't posted in 5 days, you need to put something out there. If there's no continuity or regularity or connection with you, it's eventually just going to feel like a bit of noise and a bit of just content for content's sake, which, I don't think is ultimately going to achieve your objective for making connections that can lead to a job.
Well, I think that's huge. Huge. Definitely, I agree with that. And I think, that's a good way for job seekers to build relationships. I know we've talked to, the theme, I guess, of the conversation is, authenticity really goes a long way to, showing with who you are, what your interests are, interacting, on whether it's in a discussion, on comments, on posts and everything. I mean, that would be, I think those are huge initiatives to build relationships on social to stand out. If anyone's looking to do that, what do you think? What are your thoughts on any other things that you can think of to stand out on social to be your own PR machine?
I think, just it's really down to understanding your audience. And that's something I would advise, and we do advise clients on in public relations all the time, is content can look pretty, it can be phrased really beautifully, it can flow and inspire, but if it's not reaching the people you need it to, it doesn't achieve your objective. So what I would say is, you really need to, before you start posting, before you start getting yourself out there, first shore up that foundational, your resume, right? Your profile, what you need to be, prepare your any sort of situational sort of answers to questions. You obviously always want to prepare for interviews, but you want to get to know your audiences. You want to understand if those sort of, elephants in the room we talked about, get those in line. And then just start learning about those who you might want to connect with and make those proactive connections from there. I think build systematically that way, it feels a lot less unwieldy than starting from a spot where you have a bunch of platforms. And don't be afraid to pare back too. I'll say that too. If you're finding something evaluation is a big part of public relations too, or any communications marketing field. You engage in a strategy over time. If you're not getting sort of the connections you want or the employer responses you want, you don't have to get disheartened and just say it doesn't work. Try to be self-analytical and figure out what it is you're doing and things you might be able to tweak and change that can maybe lead to different results, and make that sort of iterative process. I think that's really important.
So for those folks out there that might not know how to do this, how would you recommend they figure out who their audience is?
Mm-hmm. I think that you need to be real first with yourself on what you want in your job and your career. It doesn't have to be something like, I want to be a senior director of insert widget, company here. That'd be great if you knew exactly what you wanted to be. But I think generally speaking, you start with what you want in your career, the strengths in which you think you can bring to that, and then do research to find people and companies that represent those things, because that will help you to kind of tailor your outreach to people that you feel are most aligned with at least the kinds of things you're into. if broadly speaking, you are kind of, career agnostic and you just need a job, that happens. I think then you can apply more of those broader skills to the table. If you are a good, every employer needs someone who's really good at time management. Every employer needs someone who's a good, uh, autonomous with their own work. Everyone is so those sorts of attributes I think are highly translatable across any industry. I also think a good approach to that too, for someone who, to your question, is not as well versed in using these platforms or is maybe stuck, is to contact. You think about the decision makers or those who are the right inroads to getting jobs. So if you're interested in certain companies, reaching out to those HR reps or talent acquisition leaders if they have them, or business development people, because those are the people who are more tasked with that side of the house in finding talent, nurturing talent. And so starting conversations there can lead to, if they're not the right person, they might be able to forward it to the right person. I can say from personal experience, having moved from out of market, I don't know, 7 years ago now. I didn't know a lot of people in Buffalo, and Buffalo was a really good, incredible, in fact, community of connectors. People who didn't know me necessarily, but either received an email from me or a LinkedIn request and things like that. I would explain where my perspective, who I was, where I was coming from, and they would connect me with people they knew. And it's amazing to see how many people are willing to do that. And sort of the networking and connections you can make through it.
Yeah, well, that's the city of good neighbors for you too.
It is a city of good neighbors. That's right.
That those
Yeah.
are all good pieces of advice. Well, John, I
Yeah.
thank you so much for being on the show, and we definitely hope I think you gave a lot of good information for folks out there who will use this information to help their job hunt.
Well, thanks, Sarah. I hope so. I hope I didn't talk too much, but I appreciate that. I would say just the easiest thing I would wrap it all up with is something that my mentor used to tell me, is just to be your own advocate, be your own agent. If you treat yourself like your own agent, whether you're in a current job or you're looking for one, you can be an advisor in a way you probably didn't even realize.
Those are good points. Thank you.